I keep a vegetable garden behind the house, and most mornings, before the dew burns off the grass, that is where you will find me. Not because I have some romantic idea about growing my own food, mostly because it gives me somewhere to be that is not inside, not thinking, not replaying things. I am Marcus Holloway, and I bought this property outside of Guelph, Ontario 3 years ago, with the settlement money, from a marriage that ended quietly and without ceremony, the way a candle goes out in a room nobody is sitting in anymore. The house is older than it looks. Built in the 1940s, white clapboard siding, a covered porch that wraps around the east side. The previous owners left behind a cast-iron wood stove in the living room and about 40 jars of canned tomatoes in the cellar, and I have eaten through most of them by now. I took a job doing residential landscaping and garden design, which suited me fine. I could bid the work in the mornings, be outside by 9, and be done before the light went flat. I did not need much. I had gotten good at not needing much. Her name was Diane, my ex-wife. We were together for 6 years, married for 4 of those. She was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because it matters and because the story does not work the way people expect it to if I make her the villain. She just wanted something I could not figure out how to give her, and I spent too long pretending I understood what that was. By the end, we were 2 people living in parallel lines, polite and careful, and when she finally said the word out loud, I was more relieved than I was hurt, which told me everything I needed to know about where we had been for a long time. She had a younger sister named Bree. Bree was 4 years younger than Diane, and the 2 of them had grown up in a tight-knit family in Kitchener. I had met Bree at the engagement party and seen her maybe a dozen times after that over the years. She was quieter than Diane, slower to fill a room, the kind of person who sat at the edge of a gathering and watched things rather than driving them. She was a dental hygienist. She was engaged to a man named Paul who worked in commercial real estate, and who I always found a little too smooth, the way someone is when they have practiced being likable long enough that it stopped being real. At Diane's and my wedding, Bree was one of the bridesmaids. I remember she helped me with my boutonniere in the church foyer, because the florist had pinned it wrong and it kept drooping, and she fixed it without making it a thing, just quietly reached up and reset the pin and said, very low, almost to herself, "There, now you look like you know what you are doing." I laughed. Diane called from the other room, and Bree stepped back, and that was the extent of it. A small moment, the kind you forget and then later find that you did not forget at all. When Diane and I separated, I lost contact with most of her family. That is how it goes. You marry into a world, and then the world closes up after you. I heard through a mutual friend that Bree and Paul had gotten engaged the previous spring, that she was planning a June wedding, that things were moving forward the way things do. I heard this the same way you hear about weather in a city you no longer live in. It registered, and then it passed. I was restaking some tomato plants on the second Saturday in October when I heard a car come down the long gravel drive. I did not recognize it, a dark blue Civic with a small dent above the rear wheel well. I pulled off my gloves and walked around to the front of the house. Bree was standing beside the car, with both hands wrapped around the strap of a bag over her shoulder, the way a person holds on to something when they are not sure what else to do with their hands. She was wearing a gray rain jacket that was too light for the weather. She looked like she had been driving for a while. I said her name. She said, "Hi, Marcus." She paused. I know this is strange. I told her it was all right and asked if she wanted to come inside. She sat at the kitchen table while I put the kettle on. I did not ask her anything yet. I had learned a long time ago, mostly from the landscaping work, that when someone arrives somewhere they have never been and sits down, the thing to do is give them a minute to settle before you start asking them to explain themselves. I put 2 mugs on the counter, found the tea bags, set the sugar bowl between us. She said, "The engagement is off." I said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Don't be," or "I don't know. Maybe." She looked at the window over the sink. I found out he had been seeing someone in Toronto for about 8 months, a woman from his office. She said it the way you say something you have rehearsed into neutrality. He told me himself actually, 2 weeks ago. He said he wanted to be honest with me. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh, as if honesty at that point is a gift. I did not say anything. The kettle began to build toward a boil. She said, "I couldn't stay in Kitchener right now. My parents are wonderful, but they are also a lot. They want to fix it. They want to have opinions about it. And Diane keeps calling and I can't." She stopped. "I know I should have called first. I almost didn't come at all. I drove past your exit on the 401 and I had to talk myself into coming back. I asked her if she had somewhere else to go. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have options. I'm not in some desperate situation. I just didn't want to go to any of them. She looked at me. Is that a strange thing to say? I said that it was not. I put the tea in front of her, and she wrapped both hands around the mug. And that was the first night. She slept in the back bedroom, the one I had furnished simply with a pine bed frame and a lamp I had found at an estate sale in Elora. In the morning I heard her moving around early, before 7, and when I came downstairs she had already made coffee and was standing at the window watching the garden. She said, You planted all of that yourself. I told her I had. She said it was a good-looking garden. I could not tell if she meant it or if she was just saying something. She stayed, not in a dramatic way. She didn't announce it. She just didn't leave, and I didn't ask her to. She found her way around the kitchen on the second day. Started doing dishes without being asked. Walked the property in the evenings when the light was long. She was easy to have around in the particular way that some people are, people who do not take up more space than they need. On the fourth day, she came out to where I was raking leaves from the flower beds along the back fence, and she brought 2 mugs of coffee without asking whether I wanted one. She set mine on top of the fence post and went back to walking the edge of the garden, her hands in the pockets of her jacket. She did not try to talk. I thought that was something. I had a job over near Fergus that week, a property restoration for a retired couple who wanted their back acre returned to a wildflower meadow. I would leave in the morning and come back by 4 or 5. When I got back one evening, I found that Bree had trimmed the overgrown cedar hedge along the driveway, just the first 6 feet or so, where it had gotten ragged. She had used the hand shears I kept in the shed, and she had done a neat, careful job. She did not mention it when I came in. I mentioned it. She said, It was bothering me. I said, You didn't have to do that. She said, I know. That was the whole conversation, but I thought about it later. On the 6th evening she asked me, while we were washing up after dinner, Did Diane ever tell you why she and I weren't close for a while? A few years back? I said I remembered that Diane had mentioned some disagreement between them, but that she had never told me what it was about. Bree nodded slowly. She handed me a bowl to dry. She said, It was about you. I did not say anything. She said, She knew that I had a certain impression of you, that I thought she was not being fair to you. She didn't want to hear that from me. She paused. I'm not saying I was right. I was only seeing part of things. But Diane didn't want me to say it, and I said it anyway, and things were cold between us for a while. I set the bowl on the shelf. I asked her what she had meant. What impression? She said, That you were a person who was trying hard, and that she kept moving the target and then being disappointed when you missed. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had come up and the spruce trees at the back of the property were moving. I said, That's a generous interpretation. She said, Maybe, or maybe I just knew what I was looking at. She went back to washing the last of the pans and did not say anything else about it, and I let it go for the night, but I lay awake for a while after, longer than I had in a long time. There were things I started to notice. The way she folded the dish towel and hung it straight on the oven handle. The way she always took her coffee black, but would put a small amount of cream in it when she was tired and not paying attention. The way she read in the evenings, sitting with her feet tucked under her on the corner of the couch, not the center. Always the corner, as if she wanted to leave room even when no one else was there. I noticed that she laughed sometimes at things I said, and then seemed surprised that she had laughed. The way you are when something catches you off guard. I noticed that I had stopped spending the evenings in the workshop, which I had been doing more or less every night since I moved in. 2 weeks in, on a Tuesday car parked at the end of the drive that I recognized immediately. White Subaru, Diane's. My chest did something I was not expecting. Not dread exactly. Something more like the feeling of a room getting smaller. I walked in and they were at the kitchen table, both of them with cups of tea, and the air had that particular quality that tells you the conversation was about something else before you came through the door. Diane looked at me with an expression that was careful and measured. She said, Marcus, I hope this is okay, me coming by. I said it was fine. I sat down at the other end of the table. She said she had been concerned about Bree, that she wanted to see for herself that everything was all right. She said it with the same tone she had used near the end of our marriage, when she wanted to redirect a situation without being seen to be redirecting it. She was good at that, Diane. She could make a correction look like concern. Bree was quiet. She was looking at her tea. Diane said, I've been talking to Paul. He's devastated, Bree. He made a mistake and he knows it. He wants to talk. Bree said, I know he does. Diane said, he's willing to do counseling, whatever it takes. Bree said, I know that too. Diane said, then what is it? Why are you out here? The way she said it, out here like the house I lived in, was a strange, interstitial place. Not quite real, not somewhere a person would actually choose. Bree looked up. She said, I'm figuring things out, Diane. Diane said, you could figure things out at home, or come to us. Why here? The question sat in the room. I had been wondering it too, but the way Diane said it made it different. It made it a problem to solve rather than a thing a person was allowed to simply do. I said, she's welcome here for as long as she needs. Diane looked at me, not angry, just measuring. She said, I know you mean well, Marcus. I said, I do mean well. She left about an hour later. She hugged Bree at the door and said something into her ear that I did not hear. Bree smiled and nodded. When she came back inside, she stood in the front hall for a moment and then said, she thinks you're in love with me. I did not answer right away. She said, she's not mad. She just thinks it's complicated. I said, what do you think? She looked at me for a moment, level and direct, and then she went and got her book from the couch, and that was the end of the conversation. But things were different after that, not worse, just different. The way a room looks different once you have named the thing in it that you had been pretending you did not see. I was loading my truck one morning, the week after Diane had come by, and Bree came out with my thermos of coffee without my asking. She handed it up to me through the window and she said, very quietly, she's not wrong, you know. And then she walked back inside before I could say anything, and I drove to Fergus with the heater running and the fields along Wellington Road 18 white with frost, and I did not turn the radio on. I did not do anything about it immediately. I want to be honest about that. I was slow. I have always been slow in that way, the way that looks like patience from the outside but is mostly just fear of being wrong again. I had been wrong in a particular way before, and it had cost me a certain amount of myself that I did not want to spend again. But one evening about a week after that, we were walking the back of the property after dinner, something we had started doing most evenings without either of us suggesting it. And the sky had gone that particular deep blue it goes in November in southern Ontario, and she said, I've decided not to go back to Paul. I said I understood. She said, I decided that about 3 days after I got here, actually, but I wanted to be sure I wasn't deciding it for the wrong reasons. I asked her what the wrong reasons would be. She said spite, running away, deciding I wanted something just because it was in front of me. I asked her what she had concluded. She stopped walking. We were at the back fence, the one that borders the neighbor's property, an old sugar maple stand. She turned to look at me and she said, I think I've known something about myself for a long time, and I kept talking myself out of it because it was inconvenient. She paused. It didn't start when my engagement fell apart. It started a lot earlier than that. I said her name. She said, don't make it a big thing yet. Let's just go back and have tea. I said, okay. We went back and had tea. But when she handed me the mug, she kept her hand there a second longer than she needed to, and I put my hand over hers and she let it stay. Neither of us said anything. The wood stove was ticking as it cooled. Outside, the maple in the front yard had dropped its last leaves and the yard was deep in them. I do not know how to describe what that moment was. Small and enormous. The ordinary miracle of two people finally telling the truth at the same time. She stayed through November, and then she did not leave in December, and by the time January came, we had stopped pretending there was any question of her leaving. She called her practice in Kitchener and arranged to transfer her patients. She found a position at a clinic in Guelph. She was matter-of-fact about it in the way she was matter-of-fact about most things. She just made the calls, handled the paperwork, told me when it was done. She told her parents. That was harder, I think, than she let on. Her mother needed time. Her father was quieter about it, which Bree said was actually better, because with him quiet meant he was thinking rather than reacting. Diane called once and the conversation was long, and Bree took it in the back bedroom with the door closed. When she came out, she looked wrung out and composed at the same time. The way you look after something you had been dreading turns out to be survivable. She said, she's okay, she needed to say some things and she said them, and I think we'll be all right. She sat down at the table. She said you were always decent to her. She wanted me to know that. I did not know what to do with that exactly, so I just made dinner. Spring came and the garden came back, and Bree started coming out in the mornings to help with the beds. Not because I needed help, but because she said she wanted to understand what I was doing. She asked good questions. She had a nurse brain for systems. What feeds what needs what, how the whole thing holds together. She started keeping a notebook with small sketches of the layout, notes about which plants did well where. I found the notebook once on the kitchen counter and looked through it. In the margin of one page she had written, in her very small handwriting, "This is what it is supposed to look like." I put the notebook back where I found it, and I have never told her I saw it. She got a call from her mother the following June, a Saturday morning, and when she hung up she stood at the counter for a moment with her back to me, and then she turned around and said, "My dad had a heart attack. He's stable. They're at Hamilton General." I had my keys in my hand before she finished the sentence. We drove down the 401 together, 2.5 hours, and I dropped her at the entrance and then parked the car and went in and sat in the waiting room with her mother, who looked at me when I sat down and took my hand without saying anything, and we sat there together until the doctor came out. Her father spent 4 days in hospital. He came home with new medications and a long list of things to change. The second time I met him, at the hospital, he shook my hand and said, "She seems happy. She hasn't seemed happy in a long time." He said it the way fathers say things when they have decided to say the true thing instead of the polite one. I said, "I'm working on that." He said, "Good." That was enough. We have a daughter now, almost 2 years old. We named her June, partly because she arrived in June, and partly because we both agreed the name sounded like something that had been waiting. June has Bree's eyes and, I am told, my way of watching things quietly, before committing to an opinion. Bree and I got married last summer, just family. Her parents, her aunt from Sudbury, my brother from out west, a few close friends. We had it at the house, in the backyard, in the part of the garden that had come in the best. Bree wore a cream dress she had found at a shop on Wyndham Street downtown. Simple, nothing elaborate, the kind of thing she would buy. My brother officiated. Diane was not there, and that felt right. Not as a statement, just as the natural arrangement of things. My mother-in-law cried through the whole ceremony and tried to pretend she was not crying by not moving her face, which did not help. June slept through most of it in a carrier on Bree's aunt's chest, and woke up right at the end when my brother said, "You may kiss your bride," and she made a sound like she had something to say about it. Bree kissed me and whispered, "She has opinions." I said, "She gets that from you." She laughed. Really laughed. The way she does when something catches her off guard. I have decided that sound is one of the best things I know. There is a photograph from that evening taken by Bree's cousin, just after dinner, the two of us sitting on the back steps in the last of the late light. Bree has her head tilted toward my shoulder, and I am looking at something off to the side. Something I do not remember now. We are not performing anything. We are just there, which is sometimes what happiness looks like. I keep the photograph on the shelf above the wood stove. She showed up in October with a bag over her shoulder and told me she was not in some desperate situation, that she had other options, that she just hadn't wanted any of them. I understood later what she meant by that. She did not come here because she had nowhere to go. She came here because of all the places she could have gone. This was the only one that had felt, for a long time, like the right direction. I had been home all along.